What do we think? Are these measures actually going to make any difference, Kevin, or do they just play into the Reform UK talking points? You know, I was talking to Susanna earlier about... This reminds me of sort of 2016. David Cameron went on and on and on about reforming the EU. Shabana Mahmood talks about reforming human rights law, the European Convention on Human Rights. But doesn't it just sort of raise the profile of the very issue Nigel Farage is talking about, which is just pull out of the ECHR altogether?
Well, it certainly plays into that, because you're on his territory and you're trying to outshout him in some ways, saying, I'll be tougher. The big difference is, of course, that she argues, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, you don't have to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights to police your borders and take tougher measures. Denmark, which is the country she's following in many of these proposals, they're in the European Convention of Human Rights. You saw with the Bell Hotel, sex offender convicted was sent back to Ethiopia. You know, pulling out the European Convention of Human Rights is a red herring from the Conservatives and from Reform. You don't have to do it, nor should we do it, because the rights protect everybody. But you're right. I find some of these reforms she's saying won't just play into Nigel Farage's hands. She will argue you have to tackle the issue or you play into his hands. But, for instance, 20 years. You come to Britain as a refugee. You fled terror. You come to Britain 20 years before you can apply to stay here permanently. What about...
As opposed to the current 5-year rule.
It's going to deepen divisions. And if you want people to integrate... Well, you want them to have jobs, you want them to do stuff in the community. 20 years. You're going to divide people because you won't have any security.
Andrew, presumably, Shabana Mahmood's aim is to deter people.
There is absolutely no deterrent at the moment to come here illegally whatsoever. One in, one out just isn't working at all.
It hasn't been given very long, and it's had a few teething problems.
It's been 30-odd thousand deportations.
Hang on. Since...
Not under one in, one out, though.
No,
exactly.
no, but there is a deterrent. There is a deterrent.
Kevin, you've had your say. One in, one out is a complete disaster. Thousands and thousands have come here and stayed, and we've shoved out about 27 have left. No deterrent whatsoever. So... But I still don't see even the idea of the changing when you can apply to 20 years from 5 years. Why is that going to stop somebody getting on a boat coming here? Because they're still going to be put up in hotel accommodation. They're still going to have some years here, they'll think. And I don't see why. I just can't see that as a deterrent. And I think the Mail is quite right to point out, and a lot of Labour MPs have said the same, this will be... The immigration lawyers, the human rights lawyers will be crawling all over this.
What about Paul's point on the ECHR? There are 2 articles which people watching will, as soon as they hear them, it gets people's hackles up. And that is Article 8, which is the right to family life. And we've seen, Kevin, a number of appeals that once someone's here and perhaps they've had a child, that the right to family life means that they can't be deported. And the other one is Article 3, inhuman and degrading treatment. So that has also meant that people can't go home. But, Paul, you did an investigation, didn't you, where 2 particularly unpleasant individuals who you would not want under pretty much any reasonable person's definition to stay here. And they applied to stay under those articles and stayed. Do you want to just remind viewers what those cases were?
Yeah, we looked into the case of Brazilian fugitives who come to the UK. Often they've committed a crime or they're accused of a really serious crime and they stay in the UK under Article 3, the one that you were just talking about there, because they can't be sent back to Brazil because they might be tortured or treated unfairly in prison. So we looked at 2 specific cases. One, an alleged murderer who'd fled to the UK as soon as he was accused of murder. He's now just swanning around in London running a motorbike garage. The other, actually a convicted paedophile. I'm sorry to say this, but he raped a 5-year-old girl repeatedly, came to the UK, again, to flee his trial, and then re-offended while he was here. He was allowed to stay under Article 3. This is him, Marlon Martins dos Santos, an absolutely despicable individual. He was allowed to stay here under Article 3, and then re-offended, downloading 1,000 images of child abuse. I mean, the problem, Kevin, for me, with Article 3 is Labour aren't going to be able to reform that one particularly. It's an absolute right in the European Convention. You can't really tinker with it unless all the other European countries agree that they want to tinker with it too.
But you can on courts and how judges read that article and where they give weight to conflicting rights. Because both those cases, those people should be out of the country. I wouldn't dispute that. but there are very few cases on family life that succeed. Very few appeals actually made under it, and then we get fed a load of myths about it, including the infamous chicken nuggets case, where the newspapers, including the Mirror Online, start with the Daily Telegraph, saying somebody avoided deportation because they said their kid didn't like foreign chicken nuggets. Well, the judge completely dismissed that, and I believe the bloke was deported. So there are a lot of myths around it, but they're terrible cases, you're right, and you've got to deal with them, and she believes she can deal with them. That bit I will support. 20 years I will not.
Kevin, these are the cases that Paul's exposed. What about the other ones that haven't been exposed? Well, that Article 3 is being used as a shelter for vile foreign criminals to come here and live a life of Riley.
Well,
it's
actually,
appalling,
and
it
also,
has to stop.
The thing is that, of course, these two individuals presumably face inhuman and degrading treatment as a result of the crimes they've committed.
If you've repeatedly raped a 5-year-old girl, tough luck if you have a hard time in prison when you go back. That's just the way it is. And who would blame prisoners? They have a code of conduct in prison.
Yeah, I think this is what people find frustrating about the European Convention, right, is it's not balancing those rights. And for anyone who cares about human rights, Kevin, it's, you know, we want to have the European Convention, a lot of us, because it does protect human rights. But if people are taking the mickey out of it, that is when the likes of Nigel Farage are able to come along and say, well, just pull out of it altogether, and then all the rights go in the bin.
Yeah, and other countries deal with this, and it is what advice you give to your judges in your courts and where you weigh up those conflicting
But
rights.
do other countries have the same human rights legislation which we have, which we incorporated?
Well, they're in the European Convention of Human Rights, apart from Russia and Belarus.
Well, the fact is, I think, if this doesn't prove to work, Shabana Mahmood, if this does not be seen as a deterrent, there'll be a growing clamour to come out of the ECHR altogether.
The trouble is, there are always going to be exceptions, aren't there? There's always going to be appeals which are upheld, which might look, as you say, Kevin, on the face of it, as pretty unsavoury. And that's going to mean that whatever changes she makes, unfortunately, the highlighting of the perhaps smaller number of cases is still going to feed into the let's junk the lot of it.
That's right.
Maybe we should just focus on the benefits that we get from the ECHR.
But also, she's going to say today, isn't she? She's going to say that illegal migration is tearing this country apart. Now, that is extraordinary language for a Labour Home Secretary.
I was about to do that because it's quite important that the right keep presenting the European Convention of Human Rights, which was initiated by Britain after the Second World War, is somehow just for other people, for people who come to this country. Look, it's being used by disabled people, old people, by women who are raped. It protects your freedom of speech from arbitrary arrest. It's all our rights. It's a European Convention of Human Rights for all of us. I mean, that's very important to remember. But you always get decisions in courts which you think, that's not right, and then you can appeal. I think one proposal I think she's right is do a single appeal system instead of allowing lots of multiple appeals. I think that's quite clever to do, but you've got to put the resources into the system to do that. And the last government imposing austerity ran the tribunals and the courts and the judicial system down to the bone.
We heard her say yesterday and read her saying, the Home Secretary, it's tearing this country apart. We have this latest protest, Andrew, in an East Sussex town over government plans to house 600 asylum seekers now on a military site, a disused army camp in Crowborough. Sussex Police confirmed it was a peaceful protest, took place yesterday morning. Of course, it's part of the government's attempt to end the controversial use of asylum hotels, which it says it wants to do before the next election. It's not going to help, is it, moving people to military sites, former military bases?
Yeah, and they have... The people who are going to be in the camps can come and go as they please, and the point the protesters make is we don't know who they are, where they're from, are any of them criminals? And you can understand people's concern. And the Home Secretary has said illegal migration is tearing the country apart. I think it is in some communities, without a doubt.
But you could also make the case, one, for the value of multiculturalism, and two, you can argue we should say refugees are welcome here. People who are fleeing terror and oppression are welcome here. And you can win the argument. We won it over Ukraine.
I think you're right. We should be a safe haven for people with a legitimate claim. think one of the things that the residents yesterday were saying, you're talking about people fleeing terror, oppression. Some of the residents were saying, we don't know what condition these young men are in. We don't know what they have experienced. We don't know if there are, you know, PTSD cases amongst these, you know, if they're young men who are housed there, and what impact that would have on the local community. To what extent do you know these people are assessed before they're put into this accommodation?
That is exactly what you would have to explain to people, and you'd have to try and show people around the barracks from the local community if you're going to do that. I'm not sure warehousing people in mass sites is the way forward any more than hotels is. There's an enormous backlog inherited from the last government that'll be played through with cases heard over time. But yes, you've got to make sure there are facilities there, so you don't just put a whole load of people in who'll just go wandering out unless you introduce people to. I remember Lisa Nandy, who's now the Culture Secretary in Wigan. There was a big hoo-ha over a centre in her constituency, and they made efforts to get the community integrated. So you meet the people.
Okay.
So you know that. So you know they're humans.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say we made a documentary on this earlier in the year for the Tonight programme, and exactly that, Kevin. The problem with these large sites is you just keep people completely separated. So we went to a village near Heathrow, for example, where they had a hotel at a small village. The hotel was then filled with asylum seekers. And all of a sudden, the character of the village changed because they had a lot of people they didn't know in one hotel, and the two sides of the community never, ever met. They went in the hotel. Asylum seekers didn't really come out of the hotel that much. Isn't that a problem, Kevin, as well, with this plan today, saying, look, you've got to wait 20 years before you can get a permanent right to remain? We're just going to keep people siloed in their separate communities. There's going to be no integration. And actually, the kind of problems that we're experiencing because of that are just going to be perpetuated.
And what is the purpose of this, Shabana? Is this a really genuine attempt to cure the problem here, or is this a genuine attempt to see off the threat of reform? Because I heard Nigel Farage saying she's sounding more and more like a reform politician, but don't believe it. Don't believe the rhetoric.
Are you against 20 years?
Well, I think it's.
Are you against 10?
Well, I don't know.
Conservatives said it's kind of a game. You know,
where do you start?
When will we get to 50?
Yeah, and also 20 years, how are they going to find them?
Do you think that those who arrive illegally should not be allowed to be British citizens at all?
I think they should be deported.
Once they're judged to have been here illegally and with no claim?
No benefits.
But a lot of people do arrive illegally who have come from places where it is impossible to have a safe route.
They've come from France, which is safe.
They've
come from France, which is safe. They can go back.
Yeah, but they may not have a chance to remain in France, so they want to come to the UK.
I think that's the only deterrent.
I think
that is the deterrent that will work. You're not staying, you're not getting benefits.
We in the UK, and it's important to remember this again, just in some form of context, we have very relatively few asylum seekers and refugees coming into the UK compared to other European countries, and certainly around the world. But almost everybody fleeing terror, if you were fleeing Syria, you would have broken the law crossing into Lebanon. You'd have broken the law crossing into Turkey. It's almost the nature, because countries police their borders. So almost everybody who's fleeing terror will enter another country illegally.
OK, let's move on to some other news. This is a very eye-catching story in The Mirror, your paper, Kevin, this morning. That at the Falkland Islands, which former Prince Andrew helped to defend back in the conflict in 1982, plaques that were unveiled by the former prince have been removed from public buildings. He's been wiped from the Falkland Islands without a trace. The disgraced royal, says the Mirror, returned to the British overseas territory several times to glittering fanfare, invited to open a string of public buildings. But after the king stripped him of his prince and dukedoms a fortnight ago, the Mirror reveals every plaque bearing his name there has now been removed. I mean, he was involved in the defence of the realm.
He was. He was part of the task force. He flew helicopters to draw away the Argentine planes from the British fleet. That's what his job was. He was very brave. And when he came back, there was that iconic picture of him jumping on shore with a rose in his mouth. He was public hero #1 in 1982. It was an extraordinary... He was dashing and handsome, and he really had played his part. This will really wound him.
Yeah, because the military service, Kevin, would be like a really important part of his heritage.
Yeah, but of course he's lost all his honorary colonelships and he's going to cease to be, is it, a vice admiral of the fleet. But that's, I mean, I think that's quite right. If I was in the Falklands, you'd want the plaques, but you just wouldn't want his name on it. So you'd want to replace the plaques and you'd commemorate, because 255 Britons died, 750 Argentinians. It was a terrible conflict. You'd want the plaques, but not his name on it. And you could never take away, for instance, his medals or say he didn't serve in the war. I think that would be absolutely wrong. I've often thought in other parts of civilian life, when somebody's won a BAFTA and they've won it 20 years ago, then they're accused of offences later, then all of a sudden their BAFTA is taken away. I've always thought that's wrong. You won it at the time. But whether you want to have pictures of people and commemorating them very publicly is another matter.
It just shows his total and abject fall from grace, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Completely.
What humiliation can be left for him, really?
Is there any humiliation left for Andrew Mountbatten?
Yes. Mr.
And he hasn't even got a hyphen.
Hasn't
These
he?
things matter to these people, apparently. He hasn't even got a hyphen.
Is that common, then, not to have a hyphen?
If you're a bit posher, you normally have a hyphen.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
I thought hyphens were common.
How would you
and
know?
Posh people...
What would we know?
Because I'm common.
Yeah.
You're common. I'm almost as common as you.
But he hasn't got a hyphen. He hasn't got a hyphen.
OK,
And
the things that matter.
I'm told he is irked by this.
I can imagine. I can
These
imagine
things-
he is.
Yeah, these things sort of
You can
matter.
change his name by deed poll. You can just insert...
But it's been changed without his say-so.
Let's talk about something which I'm sure will get everybody talking this morning. A while back, we reported on this couple who had been arrested by Hertfordshire Constabulary because they had sent a number of emails to their school and complained about their school on WhatsApp. It caused a huge row about whether the police should have investigated at all or whether anyone should be arrested for making complaints, no matter the volume of complaints, about a school. It was a 5-week investigation, suspicion of harassment, malicious communications and causing a nuisance on school property. Police eventually concluded there should be no further action. But in the meantime, 6 officers had arrived in a police van, 2 marked police vehicles and arrested the couple. Now it has been decided that was an unlawful arrest. I think the police stand by the investigation, but say that the arrest was unlawful. And they've been paid £20,000.
That's half a police officer's salary.
Now,
amazing.
Harassment is a horrible thing to experience, even if it's online. It's a horrible thing to experience.
Yeah.
But if you're complaining about your school, so it's not one individual, and you send a huge volume of WhatsApps or emails, do you think that should be an arrestable offence?
No, I don't. And they were in a police cell for 11 hours. Wow. Husband and wife. 11 hours.
Fingerprinted.
Oh, extraordinary. They were treated like... It was an extraordinary...
Treated like criminals.
Yes. Over the top, disproportionate. And the mum said when she saw those police officers walking to his house, she thought they were going to come and tell her daughter was dead.
You got to also ask, why did the school go to the police? And you deal it, and look, you can have parents who've got a special needs child, I think, with and so you can imagine they're very concerned. Some parents, I'm not saying in this case, do get a bit overwrought and do send too many messages, and schools have difficulty dealing with them. But you've got to deal with them rather than ringing the police. Yeah. Who, if they then have to intervene, I can't see why you have to send 6 police officers. Can't you invite them round?
Well, this is the classic.
For
The police pursuing crimes on a screen and not on the street. We saw it with the arrest of Graham Linehan, the Father Ted guy. Six coppers arresting him, armed coppers at an airport.
And in fact, there's an article in The Sun today saying that President Trump might offer asylum to Brits who are pursued for crimes relating to free speech, views on immigration, gender, abortion. So, you know, it taps into that whole thing, doesn't it? The mega movement or MAGA movement.
He doesn't miss a chance, does he?
Are we over-policing?
Of course we are.
You want to go to the US?
Is this the same president who's suing the BBC?
Yeah, free speech.
Over speech?
Yes.
The crime of misediting his own speech.
That's right, and has set the wolves on Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of his supporters, who's now getting threats of violence. Yes, who's pursuing the former director of the FBI. Yes, as having people arrested. Yes, it's the same Donald Trump. I think he's a prize hypocrite.
Yeah, but
Careful, Kevin.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we've got $5 billion.
Exactly.
Can you imagine the GoFundMe appeal?
Yeah. I'm not giving any money, Kevin.
Yeah,
I might give
you
£1. I'll give you £1.
But you would, because it's a free speech issue.
But back to Paul's point, we have got to be careful about this. The police have got to be seen to be doing what they're paid to do, keeping our streets safe. These couple were a threat to nobody, this couple.
Let's talk about this absolutely horrific pile of waste.
How did it get there?
In Oxfordshire. Well...
It must have been there for years.
The accusation... So I think it's 6 foot high... 6 metres high, I apologise. 6 metres high, significantly bigger, 20 foot high, 150 metres long, 490 feet. It's absolutely massive. It's been there since September. Since September, it's only a couple of months. And look how much waste there is. It's near Kidlington. And a charity have described it as an environmental catastrophe unfolding in plain sight. I am very confused about why people aren't clearing this up. Now, the local council, I do believe, say it would cost them more than their entire budget to tackle that. The Environment Agency say they operate under the polluter pays principle. So they're trying to find out who left the waste, who dumped the waste.
Quite a lot of people, by the look of it.
And then get them to clear it up. But if you can't find them, how much longer are local residents supposed to live with that on their doorstep?
Yeah, it's horrific. It's an unofficial tip, is what it is.
It's got to be
a health
criminality.
Yeah, and a health hazard.
Level.
Major health hazard.
Yeah. But we saw earlier with Nithya there, it's sort of seeping now into the land around it.
It will.
Yeah,
the rain will come on.
Why is it taking so long to notice it? It couldn't have just happened overnight. It can't have happened overnight, can it?
No. Do they not have CCTV cameras
well, that's
that
the
they
point.
can pop
Surely.
up on posts?
You probably could now, but is it private land? Did the landowner know? Did the landowner care?
Wasn't it a fisherman spotted it? But it's by a busy road.
You must be able to see that from the
I think it's a very odd story.
It's absolutely horrific. The Environment Agency have now served a restriction order to prevent further access to the site. I don't know if you've seen Robert Jenrick's latest campaign. He does these very effective videos.
Yes.
You're smiling wryly, Kevin.
I was just thinking of Robert Jenrick and Tools, sorry.
Yes, well, funny you should say that, because he is concerned about... This is a car boot sale in Hounslow, and he said he's afraid that it's become a carnival of criminality. He arrived last Sunday to see thousands of tools being sold at rock-bottom prices. And in his column for The Telegraph, he said, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to work out they were selling stolen tools. When I put that charge, he says, to one particularly aggressive seller, he boasted he'd been doing this for 22 years and that the police wouldn't get him. Now, I've been to a few car boot sales, but they don't look like that.
No.
Just tons and tons of tools sold cheaply.
Yeah, that's a specialist one. There is a serious issue with tradespeople having their tools nicked from their vans, and they cost a lot of money. There's an inconvenience. Also, it's your
trade.
It's what you use. You know the tools. So you can't just go and get another one and replace it.
He said a number of those tools on sale had people's names that had been carved into them.
Which people do, because if you're on a site, you want to know, that's my drill or whatever, and
but
not,
he pointed
and not
out
somebody else.
Clearly didn't belong to the person who was selling them.
The sites say they cooperate with the police and give them all the regs, and some people have been banned, just in fairness to them. But it's a serious issue. He's not going to solve it by doing that. But you do.
He's going to raise the issue, though.
It was pretty high. It was pretty high anyway.
Yeah, amongst those people who suffered the crime.
It's been debated in Parliament, and I've seen the protests outside Parliament because, two of my brothers are were electricians.
Well,
or
good
were
for him for
electricians.
raising it. Good for him for raising it.
But you basically need the cops to raid that site now.
Yeah.
Although they've all been tipped off, really.
Well,
anyone on it.
They'll be moving on
Because
to the
Genric's
next site
been
now,
out.
aren't they?
It's an
Yeah, of course they will.
unintended
Moving on to the next
consequence
one.
of him raising it.